morning, everyone. Thanks for coming away from such wonderful coffee into what we hope and expect will be an even more stimulating first session this morning. You can see again in the program the details of the biography of Mr. Phloen Prim. I wanted, though, to also give a little bit of context as to why in particular we thought this would be something to explore. Obviously, we're talking about crossing borders, and one of the borders of adjacency is between the music education sector and the broader presentational world, which will often have educational dimensions to it and community engagement dimensions in very real and meaningful ways. And in my experience in the last decade in Southeast Asia, certainly for me, one of the most exciting projects I've experienced as an outsider coming to know new worlds has been what I've seen is happening with Cambodian Living Arts as an organization. The way in which it effortlessly crosses so many diverse artistic fields in ways that are completely integrative, and the way in which increasingly it connects traditions with opportunity for innovation in ways that seem authentic and which also seem to be embraced by the world at large. To some extent, I think it epitomizes future ways of, well, one future pathway to getting the barriers and borders to be broken down so that people reimagine what it is to be human. Behind much of that is the CEO of Cambodian Living Arts. I recently did an interview with him where he was sharing the concept of almost being the professional audience member, that one is watching from the beginning of a process how the connection is going to be formed between artist and community, and that becomes a driving energy for the organization as a whole. It's a great honor and privilege to have you with us. Thank you for making the time. Please welcome.
It's such an honor and privilege to be part of this CDM, 10 CDMs conference. Already, as the thematic speaks about connecting across border, just within kind of the brief coffee before coming here, spoke to friends from Myanmar, or from also new friends from Vietnam and other countries. So I think it's great. I think one of the things when I received the invitation for the CDM conference, it's something that I've seen a trend coming up for the past few years is really connecting Southeast Asia within Southeast Asia. I think often for many years, arts organizations were mostly based within our specific region or country, but we've always wanted to do work with the US or with Europe. But I found it really fascinating now how Southeast Asia and ASEAN country really wants to connect to each other and learn from each other. So I'm thankful for, I think, getting to know many of you who are here attending. And I will be sharing briefly from what we've been doing as I look to the conference theme, again, connecting across border. I was trying to pull out projects that kind of show why also we felt the importance of connecting within our region. So maybe I begin with introducing just slightly what Cambodian Living Art is doing. So we are a non-profit organization based in Phnom Penh, fairly large as a non-for-profit. We operate 4 different programs, not specifically to music, but all kind of art forms, so performing arts, music, theater, and also we also work with with visual artists and filmmaker. So our program now is quite wide, but we have been mostly focusing on performing arts. So as you see, the vision and the belief of the organization is really to see the arts and the culture as the heart of a vital society. I think, as you know, and I don't think it's something that I speak to an audience that doesn't know why we are really working in the arts. So there's no convincing that I need to say, but I think it's just recognizing why we exist and why it's connected to the broader role of society, and how, you know, all these arts form and culture is as important. One of the first projects I want to share, and in fact it has linked here in Thailand and also in Southeast Asia. We, last July 2016, we hosted a program under the name of the Nirmita Composers Workshop. It was initiated by Dr. Chinri Ong, who is a Cambodian-American composer who do his work in the US, but was really interested to come back to Cambodia and also specifically working with Southeast Asia to connect and to nurture what he would say nurture musicians and emerging composer. Why I'm using the term emerging composer, because as in our context of Cambodia, we don't have that many composers that were specifically trained, but we have many of these musicians. And the whole idea was really to look to traditional musicians, as most of them are focusing on the preservation and the continuity of these traditions, which is through the oral traditions of how they learn music and they learn their traditions. How can they start thinking about composing and creating new sound and new music? So the whole workshop brought musicians from Myanmar, from Laos, from Cambodia, and also composer and artists from the region, from 8 other countries in Asia, to work together to really support and nurture the creative part of many of these traditional musicians. And I know that the Nirmita Composers Workshop is also a traveling workshop idea. So I think last year they did a sessions also here in Thailand, and they will continue. But on our side, I think what we've seen really interesting is how, again, coming from the traditions and really pushing those musicians to think about creating new work. So these are some of the pictures of the workshops led by Chinri Ong. And just recently, in last October, Cambodian Living Arts initiated this idea of a world music festival. But then we were like, oh, well, world music sounds really big. So we wanted to focus on something much more authentic in terms of the identity of Cambodia and the region. So we were trying to find a name. Rep Fest. Rep means R-E-P. It's the airport code for Siem Reap in Cambodia. So the idea came from that airport code, which is mostly defining like an airport and a location. And we thought, well, we could call this festival the Rep Festivals. And the whole idea was really to bring, again, traditional musicians, but mostly also those that wouldn't have the opportunity to travel. So we identify musicians from Laos. We also have a group from Vietnam and also from Myanmar coming to work together in terms of exploring each of these traditions and the identity that each of them would have, but at the same time also starting to see how among those traditional musicians, and in fact, one of the biggest barriers was language. None of these traditional musicians even spoke English, but the music brought them together, and it's how we were able to share the different knowledge. And it was really interesting because as like the Lao group never had traveled outside of Laos and coming to Cambodia. And what we saw creating, in fact, the Lao group like 2 weeks ago, came back to Cambodia to do a showcase in Phnom Penh. And what was really interesting is because we often think that travel within the region has to be done by air, but those musicians were just traveling by road from Luang Prabang to Siem Reap and then to Cambodia. So it redefined also the way exchange can happen within the region, where often we will say, oh, we don't have the money to do that and it's expensive. But looking at the regional perspective and within the closest neighbor of Cambodia, Thailand, or Laos, Vietnam, it was so much more easy to engage. So the Rap Fest Festival was really such a I think, enlightening way for us to start seeing collaborations within very close neighbor. They've presented each of them their different program, and it was really fantastic. And also, I think one thing that was interesting, one of the aspects that I can see, and especially when we think about region, is often about the politic behind, and it speak about how each country view each other. But when it comes to having that shared space, everyone were just like in the same base of understanding, and no one felt that we needed to speak about the country, but it was really about listening the music of each of us and the difference that it meant. So those two highlights that I just talked was really from when we think about cultural exchanges from a community perspective to the region. And both of the project were really focusing on music. But of the work of Cambodian Living Arts, we also integrate different arts forms together. So we don't see necessarily specifically music, but how the whole arts ecosystem and different art forms really speak and really engage each other. So the next project I wanted to share with you as a kind of I think Bernard was one of the main collaborator for this. In fact, we were able to create this project because of the different collaboration which we had. And before I begin to speak about Bang Skol or Requiem for Cambodia, I just want to acknowledge that, in fact, my colleague and the composer, Him Sopi, who you all know attending here, had been really the driving artist behind this work. So I just want to acknowledge Him Sopi also again for the fantastic work. So what's Bang Skol or Requiem for Cambodia and what it means, I'll tell you a little bit more, but it began with Him Sopi almost 10 years ago when he finished his last commission of a Cambodian rock opera, and we were thinking about what would be the next one. And as many of you might know, because Cambodia went through this genocide, horrific conflict and killing, we wanted to think about an artistic piece that could remember the fact that we are living because others have died and have suffered. And the idea of the Requiem emerged, but the Requiem is also quite Western. It's a Western form linked also to religions, and we wanted to find something that is more relevant to Cambodia. So it's when we've engaged also, did more research with a Buddhist researcher, students from PhD students from the US who do a lot of research in Buddhism in Southeast Asia. And he came with this idea, speaking with Him Sopi, about creating a kind of almost a ritual that we call Bang Skol. And in the Cambodia term, Bang Skol means Bang Skula, which means come from the Sanskrit, means that processions when somebody died, and the ritual that is performed when we lay the body of someone, and then we put a white cloth on the body. And the procession and the ritual of pulling out that white cloth from the body to allow the spirit to go to the next life. It's called also a bangskol. So the meaning was quite deep about what it meant, but it really began with also a music idea, and that's how Him Sopi started this idea of creating a requiem. But when we worked within it, I felt that music was essential, the essential part of it, and because of the beautiful composition that Him Sopi created, but I felt that an audience would need also a larger experience to really feel what is this ritual. So we brought also another famous film director from Cambodia, Riti Pan, to collaborate with Him Sopi and to create this piece. In order to create the piece, because Him Sopi and his background of being a Cambodian composer but studied in Russia on classical compositions, he wanted to fuse traditional Cambodian instruments and music with a Western orchestra. But the context of Cambodia didn't allow us to have a professional trained ensemble in Cambodia, or neither a chorus. So we created the piece in the score, but we never heard the music, in fact, for the years that we created the piece. And so it's how on the morning I've met with Bernard and visit in Cambodia that we started to speak about the fact that we would like to find an organization within Southeast Asia who can help us pulling this project out and really for the first time hearing the full score with real musicians and chorus. So the collaboration started with the Young Sito Conservatory of Music. We brought our Cambodian musicians to Singapore and started to hear for the first time, in fact, live music, a full live music of the three beautiful movements that Him Sopi created. So the piece had world premiere last October at the Melbourne Arts Centre at the Melbourne Festival. And then last December, we brought it to New York, to the Opera House of the Brooklyn Academy of Music. It went also just after New York to Boston, and it will be presented in Paris in May at the Paris Philharmonie. So it's a piece that is traveling around the world, but our aim is to bring the piece to Cambodia in next year, in 2019, as the 40 years, to commemorate the 40 years of the end of the Khmer Rouge regime. So under a thematic of arts and peace and healing, where the idea will be to present this piece in Cambodia to the young audience and the young Cambodian. So it will have traveled the world and then landed itself in Cambodia. We also hope to maybe also present it within Southeast Asia and do more collaboration with an ensemble or a choir from Southeast Asia, and then continue the capacity building within Cambodia to also, I think when I speak to Him Sopi or even to Professor Chandara, is to create a national orchestra for Cambodia, also a Western orchestra, which I think in the next few years we would like to continue on that. So the piece was brought to, as I said, to many places. And I will now show you just a 2.5-minute clip about the work, and you can hear a little bit of the music, and then I'll finish the presentation.
When we explored to Bangskol this ritual to honor the 2 million victims of the Khmer Rouge regime, we started to feel how relevant this piece is for Cambodia, but also for the world. So many genocides are still happening. I am a survivor from Pol Pot. I need to do something about what I saw, and the Bangskol for Cambodia, I feel that also a good message to the world about the suffering of Cambodian people. We try to transform something negative to positive things, something that you can feel better. To rebuild your identity, for example, audiences involved, the weaving between film image, stage image, recorded sound, sung sound, Western orchestral form, traditional form. Full production, stage production, there's so much complexity because first of all there's cultural complexity. We are bringing collaborators from different countries, but we are telling a particular cultural context, which is Cambodia. If you don't talk, if you don't examine it, you don't have a reflection on it, you repeat. History repeat always, repeat. I read that history repeat again and again. We try to deal with our own story. We are still alive, we are still capable to composing music, we are still capable of creation, of imagination. This piece is not about the tragedy, but for me, it's really about the hope for Cambodian future.
So we had various also collaboration to create the piece. We also work with the Taipei Philharmonic, who is the main choir for the piece, because in fact the singing are Buddhist texts, not in Cambodia but in Sanskrit, in Pali. So they had to rehearse because Chinese, Taiwanese needed to also learn the language of Pali that it's not even spoken by people but chanted by monk. So the complexity of the work have really been quite astonishing, but I will have to say that to be able to create such a piece, we had to really go out there and work with many, many collaborators. So that has been our work with Bang School. And the last part that I wanted to share during the CIDEM conference is Cambodian Living Arts is initiating a new organization. In fact, it's our sister program and institutions that will be called the Mekong Cultural Hub. The idea behind Mekong Cultural Hub, which it's just the beginning, so this year we will officially start this program, is to really enhance more cultural exchange within the Mekong region, which will be Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. We want to begin with a leadership program in the arts. So we will start with a fellowship program that will bring a young leader of arts organization within the Mekong region together. And we are also doing a mapping exercise of many arts organizations that exist within Mekong that will be accessible. And that's why I think I'd love to connect to all of you who are here. But the program is focusing on Mekong, but extended to the broader, also more like largely Southeast Asia. But we decided to begin with Mekong because already, ASEAN, it's such a big, there's also distance and economical differences and cultural differences. So that's why we decided to focus on the Mekong region, but it doesn't mean that it's only engaging Mekong region country, but it does engage also other country and context. So it's something that we are just initiating, and it will begin to maybe translate with program within our neighbor. So I want to just end with a really powerful quote. An Chon Pon is the founder of Cambodian Living Arts. It's how he began the organization about 20 years ago, and really the visions of the arts across border and what arts can do to transform society. So thank you very much for having me here. I know it feels like it's such a big room, but also I feel close to everyone here. So I think we have a short session of questions and answer, and please feel free to just engage. I'm going to get out of the podium because it feels very official, and then take the microphone and just engage with you. So thank you very much. So I don't know, Bernard, are you moderating? Are we just opening the floor for questions?
Actually, I wonder if we should be thinking that we're going to open a dialogue rather than questions.
Yeah.
So actually, don't feel you are restricted only to questions. It can be, we're actually at quite a nice size. I think that we can take some of the material forward as a stimulus for responses. Who wants to kick off?
And it doesn't mean probably.
Anna, thank you. There's one coming behind you, Anna. Sorry. Yeah, there's a mic. Oh.
I think it was a marvellous idea to take the opera around the world first before landing in Cambodia, because it sends the message about what happened in Cambodia to a much wider audience than the locals who still live the memory. I expect for people in the rest of the world, the memory of what happened in Cambodia is a little bit more distant because they're not living with the effect of it every day. So I wonder what effect the opera has had on the audiences. Have you been able to gauge some idea about that?
Yes. In fact, the reason why most of the presenter decided to take the project also and present it is also linked to the diaspora community that they have, that had been Cambodian diaspora community. And for example, Melbourne, who staged our world premiere, is where they have the largest Cambodian community within Australia. And they felt that one of the idea of this project is really to connect with the history and the memory of the refugee who now live outside of Cambodia, and to connect them with their past. And when I was also first speaking to Riti Pana, to Him Sopi, you know, for us who live in Cambodia, those memories are still there. We live with the ghosts because we are living in the place where many people have died. But for the diaspora community, and especially also the younger generations, there's a disconnect about the history of their own culture and identity. And I think that exchange with the audience and the diaspora community was, for us, what we were aiming the most. Of course, I think having Australian learning about the history of Cambodia was really interesting for us, but the most powerful way was really to engage the community. And we, Dr. Him Sopi, in fact, went to each of these communities, spent time with them to engage them, went to those pagoda that we have in Melbourne. There was, I think, 6 or 7 pagoda. He did one by one the engagement with the community. And the piece was performed at the Melbourne Arts Centre, which is a huge 2,700 seats concert hall. And for us to be in a space like that was also to feel connected to your communities and to bring people who would never go inside that art center, but will because of the project. And it was such a success in Melbourne, filling the space with the community and speaking about that. So I think in terms of audience engagement, that was really key. And the same for New York, Boston, and Paris, that continuity of that engagement with the community was really important.
And I have a further question to that, and it's about the collaborators on the project, particularly, I guess, Bernard, the group from Yong Sito. I wonder how the artists felt engaging with knowledge that they may or may not have had, and the real question is, how do you intend to continue this project into the future and engage different forms of musicians and artists as part of that project?
Yeah, maybe I answer shortly, but I'd love to ask Bernard, because you also know how your students and your conductor have been engaged. But from my first perspective, one of the challenges is the score that Dr. Sophie wrote was quite complex because it integrates traditional musicians who doesn't necessarily work in their music in the same scale that a Western chamber orchestra would work. So I remember a conversation I had with the conductor of Yang Sito saying that, in fact, he was trying to get the Cambodian traditional musician following kind of the scale of the Western ensemble. But then he realized that he was doing the wrong things, that he needed to work with his Western and his students to try to also then follow the Cambodian musician. And I felt like, oh, it's interesting in terms of music, because I think we always think that it's quite universal, but at the same time, they work totally differently in the way they and I think that's from the composition that Himso-P did, that integration was really strong, because I think it's part of his own identity, being Cambodian and being part of a Cambodian family of musicians, and then learning also classical Western compositions. But Bernard, maybe also from your perspective, what it meant for the students.
Well, actually, that point is a really very real one. We were actually doing a recording of it as part of Performers Present Festival and Symposium in 2016, I think, or 15 actually, and 16. And so the final component of it was actually a workshop performance of part of the event, but we were using first-year undergraduates. And they were mainly we deliberately chose a group which was mainly from Southeast Asia, so that this was very much them getting engaged with the community. And one of the things, there's several things in the conversations with him, Sophie, which I thought were really important for putting this event on. One was that the realization of the piece was not the score, but what the performers did in the space. So that if the singers weren't singing what was on the page, what they were singing was the piece. And there was this incredibly beautiful, the point you're making, where the conductor came in and literally was trying to quantize it when the space started, because the conductor himself was a student. And so that learning journey of reimagining what the score might represent and what was the piece was extremely powerful. The second one I wanted to share was a conversation with Himso-P, which I thought was really important for first-year undergraduates to also explore, because part of the reason for putting it in the symposium was getting them to see what lay behind it, because what lays behind it is incredibly powerful. And Himso-P shared with me something that I think is so powerful indeed. The bigger tragedy is not the killing fields. The biggest tragedy is that there are still killing fields. And that's what the piece was meant to be getting us to remember. What have we learned from that process? And what does the world learn through time? And getting first-year undergraduates to begin to consider what is the power of the arts in representing those messages was a major transformation in some of their thinking. And so, in the end, the recording was what the recording was. It has its limits. One could put stronger players on it. One could do all sorts of things. But it was actually this journey of reimagining what you are as an artist at the beginning of the process was extremely powerful for us. And it was very, very meaningful to us. And I'd love, for example, that those first-year students, I would love them to be involved in a performance of the real full-on thing before they leave as fourth years. And we're trying to get performing arts organizations in Southeast Asia to actually put this event on with a free orchestra, for example. And of course, in Southeast Asia, there's not yet always the awareness of the power and beauty of this piece. This piece is a powerful and beautiful piece, and I'd like to acknowledge Himso-P from that perspective, and the full mix of it, because it's so meaningful and deep in all sorts of levels. We always talk about how these things can be integrated, but I think this is one piece that genuinely does it, and it deserves to be heard. So if you know any performing arts organizations named the Esplanade in Singapore, and you can bring them to, and you engage with this, we'd be very happy to support and collaborate. And there are others, of course, across Southeast Asia. But thank you, folks. I wondered if Mr. P actually had any perspectives of that process, of going from thinking of the possibility of this piece and the philosophy behind it, through to many years later a realization of it in a different time and in a different form, perhaps. Mr. P. Just.
Yes, I would like to ask you again, what is your question? Talk with
There's a project we're doing recently, which Prim was sharing with, was the importance of multiplicity for the 21st century. There will be many conversations going on at the same time. The question was, you imagined the piece in one time, and it then became a reality over a long time, with different conversations and interactions. Is it as you imagined? Has it grown through those processes? What's been your experience of this journey so far?
I think regarding to my experience on this composition, of course it took a little bit long time, but I composed not long, but conversation, rehearsal, thinking, talking, discussion, and researching at the end. Because we try to do we never forget our identity, and especially the musical, very old Cambodian traditional music. But of course, I rely on what the skill and ability and my knowledge that I learned in Moscow contemporary, and also my dissertation also wrote a theory about everything is gathered together, and especially I'm also wider from the university in Cambodia. And so a lot of things that combine, come together and put together to do something to do this work. And of course, there are many difficulties, there are many obstacles in the piece, but we have to do because I think that we have to take a risk. And then I told yesterday also, when we see obstacles, we see difficulty, and we go inside the problem, and we can find a resolution. And for example, in my opera, I did the rock opera because we don't have singing the orchestra. In the beginning, we would like to do the rock opera. And then we would like to traditional instrument. We would like the younger generation to see how traditional musical instrument also can perform, can play, can live, can continue to live. Also good sound, beautiful sound, beautiful timbre. And that's why it's also on in the Moscow Recruit for Cambodia. And because we call it chamber orchestra or small orchestra combined with the national ensemble, also activity. And especially we would like to highlight the musical instrument we call Prim, and in international language we call harp, arpa in Italian. We saw in the Barilan of Angkor Wat and Bayon and many temples in Cambodia. We also try to reveal this instrument in collaboration with many people, with friends, and our instrument maker. We also would like to include. Also, it's not easy because when we reveal the instrument, nobody teach. So we try to find out how to do it. And then at the end, we also have those this instrument, ancient Khmer harp also in the ensemble. And there are many things to speak, but maybe if you would like to ask a question more.
Please. Oh, the microphone. Oh,
This
okay.
actually, it's not so much a question, but just a thought. We're talking about the first-year students coming in and having to move away from what was on the page or however it was notated to being flexible. I think that's such an amazing thing for first years to have. In the Western classical tradition, we tend to sort of say, take a piece of music and play what's on the page. And already in first year, if they're being taught that you can be more flexible, this is such an amazing process to go through. And if it happens through collaboration with, between traditional instruments and classical instruments and this incredible art form that you've created, I just think, wow, that's mind-blowing for the first years, and what they will take away from that through their undergraduate course is amazing. Just a comment on learning and teaching.
Thank you. There's someone here.
Thank you. I know it's understandable, but also unfortunate that the Requiem has not been performed inside Cambodia yet. My question for you is, especially because I think it's the kind of piece that a large number of Cambodians should have the opportunity to hear, are there plans to, say, broadcast it on national television when you do the premiere in Cambodia next year? Is it available on YouTube for people to watch now?
Yeah, I think we are now just starting the process of imagining in a year and a half time how we will produce this production in Cambodia. First of all, we even don't have a theater to perform, so we're even thinking about how we could use existing space to transform it, that also in terms of the acoustic and everything that will fit the need. We are also looking at identifying maybe a Southeast Asian orchestra and choir that will be willing to work with us to present it in Phnom Penh. But the idea of really getting it to the younger audience of Cambodia, that had been the reason why we really want to land it. And so I think the broadcasting will be something that we will definitely think of to have it performed. But it will be performed for a large audience of young Cambodians. That's the aim of the piece.
Thank you. Just responding quickly to Neil's point, because I think it's very relevant for CEDUM, is actually the students from that first, they had a number of experimental experiences. One was to go to Myanmar and play alongside people who don't count, who never write music down deliberately because they see it as bordering the music. And they did that in the third week of their first year. The consequence is you have to give such students space for them to discover themselves and take things forward. You can't actually create curriculum that takes those experiences forward, but you need to give the students space that they might reimagine who they might be in the future. And of course, we can easily decide we have to teach rather than they peer learn and transform. And of course, it doesn't finish just a couple of years later. It's a 10 or 15 year project. And so we're very grateful for these opportunities to really help the students go broader and to undo some of the borders that have been created inside their own minds. And you can't actually say, let down the borders. You just have to immerse people in experiences and hope that they will find literally new neural pathways. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phloen Prim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please, sir. We have a small memento for you for being with us today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. We have more of that coffee downstairs, so more stimulus opportunity. At 11 o'clock, we have the students' session in here talking about their project and their interactions and introducing it to everybody with some of the people who've been leading that program. So please do join us here. They also will obviously be performing the consequences of the creations in the foyer of the main concert hall this afternoon. But please do join us again at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Anything else, Joe? No, fine, thank you. Thanks.